A very good afternoon to you and welcome. Today, the question straight off, let's get straight into it, is it's from Watch Film channel. It's a great video. Can you talk about what film stocks, especially comparing HP5, which you mentioned you use, versus Delta or Kodak black and white, do in terms of storytelling from your point of view? What do they do in terms of storytelling? That is a very, very good question. It's so good I almost didn't want to answer it because it's so multi-layered. I could literally spend days talking about it. And there's to answer it, it's almost like I've got to deconstruct quite a few things that for the past 40 years I've kind of almost not taken for granted. But I mean, I was born in 1965, so a little bit of context which I'll come into maybe a little bit later, but in a sense I feel like I'm a conduit for all things that happened in and around that time and moving on through the 70s and 80s and 90s and to the present day. I've sort of absorbed and soaked up a lot of the culture of the time, I suppose. And then I kind of spew it out via a camera. I mean, I think that's more or less what happens, certainly in my work. But I guess right from the beginning, I was grappling with film stocks, different film stocks, trying different developers. And I was getting close, hits and misses. I was learning the discipline of ensuring that developers are the right temperature, and if you're going to use one, there's no point in using a different one. If you're gonna mess around, if you're not gonna make things exact, then you can really learn what it is that a developer does to any one particular film. So I can talk about film, and I'm certainly going to do that. I'm going to attempt to answer this question. But I think film developers are also very important to talk about, because people, on the YouTube, you get, HP5 Plus or HP5 versus Tri-X. And there's thousands of them. And they all, I don't know, come up with something unique to them. And the reason why that might be is because they use different film stocks, but they don't tell you always what film developers they use. So very, very important. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mentioned in, I think, my sequencing vlog, the one prior to this, in fact, that I use HP5. I always have done, really. In the early days, yes, I played around, as I mentioned, just. FP4, I used Tri-X 400, T-Max, yep, Pan-F film. Pan-F film is an interesting one because it's beautiful film, but it's kind of precious. It's a 50 ISO film or ASA film. Shot some stuff on that, but realised that, not a lot of leeway. You've got to have a fairly static, to get the best out of it, from my point of view anyway, the way I shoot, I realised that I probably need to use it with portraiture more than anything else. it doesn't give you an awful lot of scope, an awful lot of speed, and in England, as I've said before, 3/4 of the year is kind of overcast. So, yeah, I'm up a cul-de-sac there. As lovely as it is, it's also a very fragile, precious film. You've got to get some light in there of one source or another. So you kind of work things out, and you're also working out what you shoot and what really moves you and makes you take a photograph. What subject matter is important to you, and all this kind of stuff. I've said it before. You probably all know by now that I'm just interested in the human condition, good, bad, and in everything in between. So I'm a 50 shooter, and that's another important thing. And the conditions I shoot in England most of the time. I love shooting abroad. I absolutely love shooting abroad. But, there are two layers here. There are two things to consider. One is the practicalities of things in terms of what you can use and it work. So from a technical point of view, if I'm shooting with a 50, I'm not going to always get an awful lot of depth of field with not great light. When I say not great light, I mean not a lot of light. Low light is wonderful. It can be wonderful if you use it properly. In fact, I love atmosphere in my photographs. I love a bit of mystery. It depends on the subject, depends on what I'm shooting, but I love low light. But I can't shoot 50 Pan-F Ilford film in low light. And not unless I'm going to use some artificial light and a tripod and all that kind of stuff. That's not how I work. I shoot very simply, one camera, one lens. Normally an MP with a 50mm Summit lens. So, you can try all sorts of different things, but whatever you use, it has to work. It has to technically work. You have to be able to get, for me, a depth of field is important. Sometimes I don't want much depth of field, but I want the scope. I want the option. I quite like to have a lot of things in focus, if possible. Most of the time, not always. But I like that choice. I like a maneuverability. If you're at f5.6, f8, that's optically where most lenses are best at. Optically. In terms of minimizing vignetting and having edge-to-edge sharpness. But, if you move in, you can open up. If the sun comes out, you can stop down. So you're not stuck either way. Now, in addition to the film I use, which is Ilford HP5, the vast majority of the time, I do shoot Delta as well. But I push 2 stops almost all the time. Not all the time, but I would say 95%, 98% of the time. I've got 3 cameras. They're all parked at 1600 ISO. Put the film in the back. I don't even need to look at it. I do look at it just to make sure it hasn't slipped or done anything. It's just a little tick box, make sure. But they're always parked at 1600. So in theory, I'm underexposing 2 stops and then compensating in the development time and with my chosen developer. Now, all these things are relevant. These are all practical decisions that I've got to make based on how I shoot, the kind of lighting I'm shooting in, 3/4 of the year, not particularly sunny. If I lived in Dubai or I don't know, Africa or something, I'd maybe shoot it with Pan-F or something. I could get away with it there. I'm not sure. Maybe I wouldn't. But do you see what I mean? There are things that you need to do to not to box yourself in. Practically, you need to be able to maneuver. You need to be able to take photographs in slightly different situations all the time, and you've got to have some leeway. So, I can tell you exactly how I arrived at. Well, not at HP5 so much. That was just that literally, I used Tri-X quite a bit. And I'm talking about at college, sort of 40 years ago, whatever it was. Yeah, probably about 40 years ago. And I just found Tri-X, it was kind of really nice in some ways. And I'm not sort of knocking Tri-X, but I just found it to be a little bit contrasty. Now, you might say, yeah, but there's quite a bit of contrast in a lot of your shots, if not all of them. Not massively so, but I'm slightly above the average, I would say. And that's perfectly true. But that doesn't mean I want contrast in my negatives. If you've got contrast in your negatives, then that's it. You're locked in forevermore. You see what I mean? I would rather put the contrast in afterwards, in Lightroom, or if I'm in a dark room with a higher grade, more contrasty paper. That way, I've got the choice. I don't, the thing about Tri-X is that it is inherently more contrasty than HP5. I'm not going to get into the silly argument of which is better. For me, HP5 is better, but that's just for me. That's my preference. That's what's gonna give me what I want, and that's what it's really all about. I don't want to be hemmed in. Tri-X is, people say, oh yeah, but I like contrasty images. That's fine. Put it in afterwards. Don't. It's like a recipe. Once you've put those ingredients into the cake, that's it. You put it in the oven, you're going to get what you're going to get. You see what I mean? Better to have a malleable negative that you can work with, that you can keep as is, or you can just up the contrast a little bit. You can't put in dynamic range if it's not there. If it's already contrasty, you've dialed out the midtones. That's what contrast is. So better have a really good negative that you can work with that has all the information there, but then if you decide you want to crank it up a little bit in Lightroom or Photoshop, you can. You're not stuck. You're not hemmed in. It's not a good place to be. And plus, if you're shooting in a contrasty situation, the sun's, it's blazing sun, you've got deep dark shadows, boy, that's where Tri-X is a no-no for me, because it's just even more, the scene is contrasty, you've got contrasty film, it's, going over my limit of what I want. So there's the technical thing, and then there's the aesthetic side of things. Combination photography is always, unless you're from the group F64, where, I'm not going to get into that, that's another vlog, but, from the pictorial era of the, the Steichens and the Steiglitzes, where things were kind of done bichromates and lots of tones, and, it's about being an artist, and then that all changed. It had to be all sharp and clean, and sort of Ansel Adams era, and that kind of thing. Look, for me, it's not about labels. It's about getting what you want. Not getting what you want, but, getting what you want. I'll say it there. Getting something that works for you, that it's about finding your voice. For me, it's about finding your voice. I can hum and ah about images I've taken all day long. I mean, I do. But the one thing that I always love, whether I decide it's not a good image or not, I always love the aesthetic that I have. Now, I'm not trying to sort of sound like, big-headed or anything. I'm just saying, no, I've worked on that. My aesthetic, I'm absolutely 100% with my aesthetic. I get what I want because I know what I'm going to get. Out of 36 exposures, I hang them up to dry once I've developed them and washed them, and there they are. Boom, 36. Not 1, 2, 3 blank, 1, 2, 3 a little bit thin. No, 36 exposures, and I know that I can then put them in, scan them or do what I'm going to do to them, and I'm going to arrive at a place where my highlights and my shadows, my blacks have just enough detail, and it's a balancing act a lot of the time, but I arrive at a place that I love aesthetically. I know, I don't have to spend too much time doing it because I know it inside out, and I never ever waver from that. It's kind of like I was trying to think of analogies and what have you, but if you take the Beatles, yes, they had different subject matter. They sang about different things. They were very experimental. Sergeant Pepper, and that's completely different to when they started out. But they all have that Lennon-McCartney harmony, that incredible essence that is the Beatles. Along with fantastic drumming and obviously George doing his thing. When you put those things together, it just makes a sound that is, it's just something very, very special. And for me, that's always important. It doesn't, the Clash, completely different group, but you can hear footage of them thrashing, and it just makes a horrible noise, and there's nothing good coming from it. And then they've worked at it, and they've tweaked things here, tweaked things there, and they've started to understand that the vocals are just and you get a good producer, and they're just arranging things in such and such a way, and all of a sudden you get this incredible sound. Things don't just happen. You've got to tweak, you've got to work, you've got to experiment, you've got to play, you've got to have fun. I think, but it all sort of amounts to work and getting your expression, the expression that's right for you. And I can talk about films, but that's, HP5 might not be right for you. I'm not saying use HP5 Plus because I think it's a better film. It's a better film for me than Tri-X. Tri-X has got a name. It's got a big name. But Ilford's been going a lot longer than Kodak, and I mean, as we speak, even Kodak films are just twice the price. They're not twice as good. If it was twice as good, then I kind of go, okay, I get that, that makes sense. But Tri-X is not a better film. It's only a better film if you prefer it. It's as simple as that. It's about your flavour. It's about your taste. Some people like hot food. Some people, it's just, it's personal preference, isn't it? That's what it boils down to. But I think it's important to understand what it does and experiment with different developers. I mean, I can make HB5 look ugly as sin. Very easily. Just use the wrong developer. I can make Tri-X look nasty. I promise you. There are developers out there that do a very poor job. They'll get the job done, they'll develop your film, but the grain looks horrible. And I love grain, but it's possible to make it look horrible. It is. For me, grain is important. You know, it's like, why don't I shoot colour? Well, why don't I put a sepia filter on? You know, because I don't like it. I like other people. Some people's work with it, but that's not my flavour. It's not what. It's not what I see when I get my head turned and I want to take a photograph. I don't see sepia. I see beautiful rich blacks and beautiful midtones. You know, greys. Greys are really important to me because you often get in smooth tones in grey areas beautiful silver halide grain going on. You know, but again, you know, it's about understanding certain stuff. So if you only print 5x7 prints, let's say, it almost doesn't matter because you're not going to see an awful lot of grain. Even if you've shot with a grainy film. You know, a 3200 film on a small print is not really going to show that much. It might show a little bit, perhaps a bit more than 400, pushed to 1600. But what I'm saying is, you know, when you put it on a 27-inch screen, then you start to see the stuff happening. If you print, say, 1620, piece of paper, 1620 inches, I'm talking, or 1216 even, you start to see the magic happen. You know, if you're watching this, and I put some shots up here, if you're watching this on a phone, you won't really see it. You have to sort of see it on a platform that is large enough to, you know, the image is going to expand, and then you're going to, you know, if I go the opposite way and print massively, then yeah, the grain is going to start to look like golf balls, you know, or something. You know, it's about understanding what you're going to get with what film, with what temperatures of which developer, and understanding that, you know, what it is that you like. I mean, there's no right or wrong. I mean, look at William Eggleston's work. It's nothing like mine, and mine's nothing like his. He obviously likes what he does, so that's all cool. You know, it's a million miles from what I want to do. I can't even think in his language because it's just alien to me. But there's no right or wrong. If he's happy with what he does, then that's great. That's all that has to take place. You know, am I happy with my stuff? Most of the time, no. A resounding no. But I get lucky occasionally. You know, all those things align. All those things come into play on occasion, and something is just right. Something just works. And there is a lot of luck involved in it, especially with, you know, real slices of life, because you can't make that up. It's just happening. You're either looking the right way or not. You know, wonderful things can pass you by and you're just absolutely oblivious to them. So there's a lot of luck involved. But if you get that luck, you need to know that certain things are in place. The technical aspects are in place. Your lens is at the right place, and you know which way your focus throws, and that all be very, very, very quick and automatic. And then, boom, when you've got the image, what do you do with it? Well, I know. I know what I'm doing with it. And that's going to give me a certain kind of negative because I've shot on a certain kind of film, and I'm going to be able to scan them, and they're going to look like crap coming out the scanner to begin with. Flat, boring, like porridge, grey, horrible, not terribly sharp at first glance. But as I tweak things a little bit, all of a sudden it starts to, okay, now it's happening. Boom, I've got the sharpness, I've got the depth of tones. Just a few tweaks, nothing major. Maybe a little bit of dodging and burning, just in places. And I have something where, whether I'm shooting in England or France or Italy, I don't really want it to be that obvious where it was shot. I don't like labels. I want it to be classic. I think black and white helps me with that. It gives, grain as well, obviously, is important to me. I don't want it to be in your face. I don't want it to be massive. I just want it there. I want it to be fairly fine, even if it's HP5. You might say, well, why don't you use Delta? Because that's finer. Yeah, but my developer gives me finer grain with HP5 as well, so I don't need to worry. I could get the same thing pretty much with Tri-X if I dumb things down a little bit. But there's no point. I get it first time without tweaking with HP5. HP5 is, I think, it's the best film for what I do. And yeah, I mean, as I say, it's just about tweaking little things, doing certain little things that are going to give you a certain kind of flavour, a certain, finding your own voice, whether that be heavily saturated colour, whether that be, there's some fantastic stuff. You look at Ellen von Unwerth's stuff, it's very saturated colour, very gritty, very grainy, but it's not the grain that I like. It's just, but in her work, it's great. I love what she does. I love all sorts of photographers that are completely different to me, but I can't do what they do. I can. I could try and copy it to various degrees of success, but that's not my voice. So I don't even think in those terms. I appreciate what they do, and I love what they do. All sorts of people, all sorts. Nothing like my work. Mine's just mine, and that's all I can say about it. It's fairly much the same. The subject matter's very varied, hugely varied, but it gets the same treatment all the time just because I like it. It pleases me on some level. Why I choose it, I think it just has something to do with the fact that it's a little bit gritty, a little bit, not too much, but a little bit on the edgy side, while still remaining classic and timeless, and the aesthetic, as I say, the grain. I just love. I mean, I never get tired of it. If I got tired of it, maybe I'd shoot something else. I'd change stock, or But it gives me what I love. I've written a few things down. I've not even been looking at these, but I just want to sort of have a look and see if I've I'm just going to talk a bit about the Bauhaus, and I guess when I mentioned maybe talking about it earlier, a little being born in '65. I grew up, obviously the Beatles and the Stones were prevalent. if I was doing Desert Island discs, I think probably 2 out of my 8 discs would be probably the Beatles. The earliest song I can remember is Yellow Submarine. But then, other things start to happen in the 70s. You get the kind of American rock stuff, the softer, the Eagles and some American English bands. What are they called? Supertramp, and and there's a lot of discontent going on. An awful lot. There's an undercurrent, but there's also the love concerts and the hippie stuff going on. There's a lot of harmony and there's a lot of discord, and there's there's always a bloody war, isn't there, somewhere? The Vietnam War, and then you've got the 80s, and you sort of roll on a little bit, and you start to get the Clash, and you start to get Iggy Pop and Bowie and people like this that are just, they just have something that is, for me, amazing. Absolutely amazing. I never get tired. I never, ever get tired of hearing it. It sounds as fresh today. It's just timeless. It is timeless. It's the Stranglers and lots of other stuff. I mean, lots of other stuff. And then the 90s, in its own way, has its own charms, and you've got Bowie still there doing his thing, and you've got the Stones doing their stuff. It's, I don't know. There's all this cultural stuff that you're sucking up, it's sort of like a subconscious thing going on. And then there's life going on in parallel. And you're getting your own thoughts and your own feelings and your own upsets and your own angers and your own, triumphs and failures. And, life is difficult, isn't it? It is like, it's very difficult. But you get little pepperings of amazing things that happen. And for me, this is what it's all about. If I was 10 years old now, I'd probably just shoot digital and just shoot colour. I don't know, would I? I'm not sure. But that would be my age, wouldn't it? That would be my era, my time, and that's what's prevalent. Although a lot of people are going back to film for a very good reason, I think. It's like synthesizers and computer music versus real instruments, real guitars, real drums. That's the difference for me. It's the same. Film is just the most wonderful thing in the world. The flavour, storytelling, well, that's what it is. I love a bit of atmosphere. I love a bit of avant-garde, a bit of Bauhaus, a bit of like bohemian things. I love, the Ian McEwans of the world, authors, their books, Alberto Moravia. I love old Italian, Fellini films, and that had a massive. Some of these films you see, they're not just brilliant stories, but they, every scene is like a photograph. It's just like so atmospheric, so beautifully lit, or so just, the geometry is just it's just right. It's so, geometry for me is probably I can talk about film stocks, but geometry is really the most important thing for me. In trying to capture life, real life, apart from portraits which are staged, But for me, it's all about the reality, the grit of life, and that's where black and white film comes in. It tells that story a bit better, and the aesthetic is just beautiful. I mean, it's just, you're not dealing with colours anymore. You're not, it's like taking the sepia filter off. You've just moved that out of the way. You don't have to worry about whether colours clash or whether they're just right. And then, I've taken colour photographs where the colours are absolutely beautiful, but that's all you notice. It's like, and I don't, that's not photography for me. I remember my father saying, why are you still shooting black and white? It's like saying to an artist, why did you put a bit of yellow, a splodge of yellow oil just there? Well, for me, black and white is. It's the right medium. It tells the story that is right for me. I don't, and it's also just removing that annoyance in a way. For me, colour is annoying. It's sort of just, it's distracting. If you've got great geometry in a photograph, in that rectangle, great light and shade, and some grain, some glitter, that's my thing. It's my voice, I guess. And I think that's probably all there is to say about it. It gives me what I want. I was going to mention, early on, it just it was in London, and I was with a friend, and we were in Covent Garden, and we'd stopped for some lunch, and I just remember sitting there, and she had a Canon A1, I want to say. It was an A1 or an AE1. I remember it like it was yesterday. And she had a long lens on. I don't know how long, but it was a, longish lens. And she photographed a guy eating an orange. He'd just peeled an orange and he was taking off segments. He was eating an orange. And we were both at college at that time. I think just out of, conversation, I was making a bit of conversation or something, I asked her how she would process it. And she sort of put her camera down and started to eat a sandwich or whatever it was. And I saw her scribbling on a napkin. And HP5, push 2 stops, developer, 20 degrees centigrade, and she just handed it to me. And a couple of weeks later or whatever, I saw this napkin, and I thought, I'll give it a go, see what that's like. And I never looked back. That was how I actually discovered my combination. Just a chance comment or question, and that was it. It was as simple as that, and I kept the napkin for years and years and years. White napkin, blue ink. I can still see the writing, and that just worked for me. Might not work for you, but it worked for me, and that's how I sort of stumbled on it, I suppose. And it's back then I would go into a dark room and I would use Ilford Gallery fibre-based paper with a bit of selenium, not much, otherwise it tended to go a bit violet looking, purple or whatever. But if you just, at the right temperature, you use a clearing agent, two fixing baths, fresh fixer, selenium, and it would just give those blacks a depth, a certain, didn't get rid of detail, but it always went to the darks first. And anyway, I don't use darkrooms anymore, unfortunately, or fortunately. And yeah, that was just how I stumbled on it. Just pure chance, no more, no less than that. Um, yeah, I just found it. That was it. I was off. I didn't know I was off. But I just carried. It wasn't like, oh, it was an epiphany or something, and thank you. No, I just carried on using it, and I've never looked back. It's just, when I said it was difficult at the beginning to sort of deconstruct stuff, yeah, that's part of it. I had to sort of go back and really think about it and work out why I've just kept on doing the same thing. Am I just boring? Am I just, maybe I am, I don't know. But honestly, I don't think it's that. I think it's just a question of finding your voice and getting what pleases you. Colour photography, if you're into colour, couldn't be more different in many ways. If that's what you're into, then go with it. If that feels right to you. I don't think it's about copying other people. I really don't. It's about sucking up all that culture. It's about feeling stuff and seeing stuff, and what moves you. What really moves you? What takes you? I mean, all sorts of things have moved me. Other photographers have moved. Helmut Newton has moved me in the past. He doesn't move me now. I still think his portraits are fantastic, and I get what he does or what he did, but it's all very contrived stuff, which I'm just not into. I sort of grew out of it, if you like. I had to sort of understand what was going on there, that sort of Berlin mystery and that sort of secret club kind of thing that he does, that atmosphere. And I think coupling it with street photographs very often, taking a location and then giving something, producing something eerie, but it's all contrived. So it didn't last very long, but I took a little bit from it, I guess, in some way. In terms of the atmosphere, I love atmosphere. I like something, but if you're just shooting real life, it's you. Atmosphere is atmosphere where and when it happens. I can do it more so with a portrait, perhaps, and sometimes in street, because some things are more atmospheric than others. But I definitely love that thing. That's where I learned about my shadows. I love my blacks, and something that feels a little bit more, not just a record of life. Something that has a little bit of mystery and a little bit of, I do love atmosphere. All those things come together with the film choice, with the developing, with what turns my head, and it produces that kind of narrative, I suppose. I keep looking at the question, storytelling. I guess that is the story, isn't it? That's how it works for me. That's how I produce what it is that works in my mind. That suits that's how I want it to look. So yeah, waffled on long enough. And I hope that was interesting on some point, to some degree. Leave me some comments and let me know what you think. Things that have, that grab you, things that interest you, things that work for you. What kind of films you use and why you use them. That's what it's all about. Thanks very much. See you for the next one.